Hey, David, I want to talk just a little bit about Edgar Cayce because it somehow ties into some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Well, when that book came out, of course, The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, and the pictures of Edgar Cayce, a younger version, and you were almost identical. I mean, it was amazing. If I remember, Cayce was wearing like a little top hat or something like that.
That's right.
But you had the same profile, the same nose shape, everything. Do you think you might be the reincarnated Edgar Cayce?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that when someone has as much of an impact as he did, their soul becomes like a template that could affect multiple future incarnations. So I want to make that clear. I think that any number of people could have soul attributes that are connected to historical figures. This is why we hear so many people, when people think that they've become a reincarnation and they have a spiritual awakening, they don't say, yeah, I was a peasant named Miroslav in Russia in the 16th century. You know?
That's right. I was Cleopatra. I was Mark Antony. I was something like that. So true. So true.
So I feel like what has happened is I've been handed an opportunity because there is a stunning facial resemblance, and we have the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who's actually done the legwork mostly in the Middle East, where they have over 2,000 cases of people who remember being someone else, and they have very specific data that they recall, which Stevenson would then go and find out if it was true. And in all of the authentic cases, you have a stunning facial similarity, which, of course, throws everything that we know about biology and heredity up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Because how the heck do you get faces looking alike when you're born with completely different parents?
Good point.
So facial morphology has to have something to do with the soul and not just the Mendelian genetics of how your two parents mix together.
Unless this is incredible probability that Edgar Cayce's parents looked like your parents.
Well, I did apparently gosh. I had the same father. You know, that is a very interesting fact, which we also documented on my website. Edgar Cayce's father was called the Squire. That was the name he used. And my father would only shop at the Squire shop for men's clothing.
Whoa. Might your father have been the reincarnated Edgar Cayce father?
Exactly.
Wow.
And remember, too, that there is a science behind reincarnation, and I know that a lot of your listeners are identifying themselves as Christian, and one of the most important things that Cayce was teaching was a sort of corrected version of Christianity, corrected in terms of what his higher guidance was saying. Those who don't know who Cayce is should bear in mind that there's over 14,000 documented cases of him having nothing but someone's name and address and a time that this reading would happen, and he would loosen up his collar and his cuffs and go into a deep meditative state of trance in which he was unresponsive to physical pain. There were doctors sticking needles under his fingernails, and he didn't wake up. And he would speak with omniscient intelligence, including the ability to give a precise medical diagnosis with no information whatsoever about the patient, other than their location. And what we find out is that Christianity has been bastardized by essentially the Roman government,
Sure.
which turned it into a tool for the manipulation of the masses and eliminated anything that would threaten this idea of either pay your taxes or you're going to burn in hell for all eternity. Well, if you restore, see, when Emperor Constantine used his power to create the New Testament in the Bible, he just simply tossed out anything he didn't like that was going to get in the way of creating this totalitarian government. And one of the things he tossed out was reincarnation, but he didn't get everything. They weren't specific, they weren't thorough enough. And so there are certain clues, and again, it's going to make me sound like a Bible thumper, so I apologize, but one of the ones that all of these books about Jesus say that you got to clue into, and you'll see it in the Bible, when it jumps out at you, you're like, oh my God. It said, somebody asks Jesus, who has sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, wait a minute. Okay, I get the parents thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did his parents sin, and then it was some penitence that this guy had to be born blind? But this man, how did this man sin
as a baby
if he was born blind?
Right.
Right? So that's one of the ones that they missed. But then you got to go back, and I do this in my book, The Synchronicity Key. There's a lot of data in there. I go back to one of the original founding fathers of Christianity who actually spoke to St. Clement of Alexandria, who was bosom buddies with St. Peter. Okay, so you got St. Peter, St. Clement, and then you got this guy named Origen. So St. Peter shared with St. Clement, who then shared with Origen, the hidden teachings that Jesus is talking about in the Bible that they don't say. Because remember, the apostles are all bummed out that Jesus is always using parables. There's all these metaphors he keeps making.
Yeah, why did he hide so many phrases that way?
It's very strange, right? Like, what does he mean when he says that the tiniest seed has become the largest tree in the garden?
Yeah.
You know? What we see is that Jesus had to honor free will, and he had to disguise the most important teachings in forms that if people were not actually ready to see them, they wouldn't see them. And the same thing happens in our dreams. Our dreams are conveying very useful information to us, but if you don't want to see what it's saying, you don't have to, because it's always veiled. So that veiling is how you're able to convey information without interrupting on people's free will. Now, there are people out there, you've undoubtedly had them on the show, who try to say that this whole thing was a confabulated series of historical accounts put together by the Roman government. I don't believe that. I believe that there was a man who was here on earth who did these phenomenal things, and that happened for our own greater good, even though fundamentalist religion was going to be created from it, which in some cases is the veritable manifestation of the Antichrist that is described in the Bible. You know, why does it say in the book of Revelations the Antichrist was wounded on the side and yet did live and was fashioned into an idol to be worshipped by all peoples and all nations of all tongues?
Precisely.
That sounds an awful lot like something we know. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of scholars who have said the only logical answer to who the Antichrist in the Bible is would be the Christianized, government-sanctioned Jesus, which is not what the teaching was. So if Jesus is teaching reincarnation, which is what Origen was told, by the way, that the biggest secret teaching of Jesus is reincarnation, if that's true, then that means that no matter how badly you screw up, you're going to get another chance.
That's right. And then another chance, and another chance.
And so one of the interesting things that the Cayce readings added to the Christian lexicon is this idea of soul groups, which were traced meticulously in the Cayce readings, that the people that are the closest to you in your life are the people that have been the closest to you in other lifetimes. And you continue to work out issues with them from lifetime to lifetime. And this includes the villains, not just the people you get along with. And even the great villains in our history are reincarnating with us and fulfilling parallel roles. And again, getting back to what I said in Synchronicity Key, I show undeniable evidence that Hannibal, the great Carthaginian warlord who was the plague of Rome during Rome's time, reincarnated as Hitler. And they did very similar things, exactly one age of the zodiac apart, 2,160 years apart.
Do you think the Antichrist is alive on the planet now?
Well, if you actually go for what the Cayce readings say the Antichrist is, they describe it as an influence. Insofar as that influence has materialized in various, what they would call in esoteric science, archons, or human servants of the agenda, then yes, there are multiple humans here on Earth who are embodying the Antichrist job and fulfilling that archetype. And you have to understand that someone who is in this modality, they do not think they are evil. They believe that they are humanity's salvation.
Right. They do not believe they're a product of the devil at all.
They don't even think there is a devil. They think that's a gross misinterpretation, and they think that Lucifer is actually the good guy and is the patron saint of all the cool ancient mystery school teachings. So you start hearing this over and over again. In fact, when somebody tries to pose as an insider and wants to get on my good side, one of the first things I ask them is, well, what's your opinion on Lucifer, and just see what they say.
That's interesting. A trick question, huh?
Yeah.
Well, with Cayce, he did an incredible job with readings, health readings, recommendations, therapies, earth changes. Do you have that feeling that you do this too?
Well, it is a documented fact that on my website I began advertising intuitive readings in 1999, and I continued doing that as a full-time job until 2008 or 2007, I believe. Yeah, it was 8 years. So during that time, I have all the cassettes still in my closet. It's 90-minute cassettes in which I would talk to people for the first 45 minutes about what they wanted to know. And that was important. You don't want to just go in blind. What the person offers as far as what they're seeking has everything to do with what they're going to get. Now, these readings in certain cases, I would do a very similar process as Cayce, except that I would self-hypnotize, and I was conscious of the sound of my voice talking, but I would try to detach from the material. So I wasn't actually tracking what I was saying. I just allowed myself to speak, and that might not be something people could identify with, except you have to remember that this involves a very deep state of meditation in which it's a similar thing where if you're first waking up in the morning, you hear all this chatter in your mind, and everybody normally just thinks that chatter is garbage and, oh yeah, I'm just here, I'm daydreaming or whatever. But it turns out that everyone has this ability. We all have a nice little CB radio in our mind, and if you start paying attention to these little murmurings, it turns out that they are intelligently derived, and you have to tune in, you have to get reception. It's not like the first day you do it, you're going to get great results.
David, have you always been a tuned-in kind of person?
I would say that I've always had ESP, or extrasensory perception, since I was a small child. It still did take a lot of work. I was fortunate enough to have the resource of Coast to Coast AM, and at the time it was Art Bell, and he was bringing people on who were remote viewers, and the absolutely stunning accuracy that these remote viewers could get, where they can work up to a point where they have 99% perfection in identifying the source of blind coordinates, where they are just given numbers and have no idea what it is, and then they start sketching what it is. Well, I got all the books, and I read up on remote viewing, and I learned what they did to screen out their conscious mind, and I put it into practice, except that I use those protocols to derive verbal information instead of to derive location information like they do. And so I used a very exacting scientific protocol, and I began to get information that was extremely accurate in predicting the future, and it happened so many times that it was totally astonishing, and a very wise source of guidance that identified itself as my soul. And so to be able to talk directly to your soul is quite an honor. But as the saying goes, it also has great responsibility, and once you start doing this kind of work, you have to be extremely, extremely high integrity. You cannot afford to take liberties with your morals, your ethics, and the quality of your treatment of other people. If you start to act in a controlling or manipulative or consciously unloving manner towards other people, you open yourself up to all kinds of trouble.
No mistakes.
Well, you're allowed to make mistakes, but you pay for them, and you're going to pay a lot harder than most people would.
Well,
so I have to be extremely careful. There's probably some karmic reason why I'm sick right now. I don't really know what it is. It's not like
You never get sick, David.
Well, I used to get sick a lot, but I also wasn't exercising every day. Now I walk every day. And I don't really know what the karmic reason is. I know that I have wrestled with the fact that things in the world have not yet changed as much as I hoped they would, and that does cause me some frustration.
Are you traveling a lot to Boulder?
Yeah, I just got back from there, and
that's pretty extensive.
This whole illness started before I left, and so I had to do that whole trip, feeling like this.
Oh boy.
So,